We are in Phnom Penh, the capital of Cambodia. A city that we could describe as organized chaos, pretty much like all of Southeast Asia. Street food everywhere. People walking with their carts, the tuk-tuks, and the cables that look like a rebellious teenager's room. And as we can see, there are a lot of places where food safety just left the group. Well, actually, it never even joined. And you can't miss the watermelon guy shouting cheap watermelon. Your eyes can't keep up with so much visual stimulation. And that's even though I've already been in Cambodia, not just in Cambodia, but in Southeast Asia for several days now. In the past, the capital of Cambodia wasn't Phnom Penh, but the city of Angkor. A little over 300 kilometers from here, we can find this amazing temple, which today is also part of their flag and on the shirt of Mr. Okun. In fact, in the past, it wasn't even Cambodia, but rather it was the Khmer people. The word Cambodia itself, the name of the country today, also comes from the Khmer language, which is actually pronounced something like Kambuja, which means the descendants of Kambu. And Kambu was an Indian sage. The Khmer Empire fell in 1431 after the Siam tribe invaded the entire territory and ended up conquering Angkor. Just so you know, just as the Khmer are the basis of the ethnic composition of Cambodians, the Siam are the basis of the ethnic composition of the Thai people. After that, Cambodia became a buffer state between Siam and Vietnam. Some parts belonged to one at one time, then to the other. They kept having a whole series of territorial and governmental conflicts which developed between the 1400s and the 1800s. Until in 1863, who shows up? The French, who were eager to obtain territories. And in this part of Southeast Asia, they formed Indochina, which was made up of present-day Vietnam, present-day Laos, and present-day Cambodia. In the southern part of Vietnam, Cochinchina, they turned it directly into a colony. And other territories like Cambodia, they turned into a protectorate. What does that mean? That even though they had their own king, they were ruled by France. Nowadays, there are still protectorates in the world. For example, Gibraltar, which you can see in the list of videos from Un Topo por el Mundo. When the French invaded Cambodia, its capital was the city of Odum, but they decided to move it to Phnom Penh, where we are now. And the etymological origin of this city's name comes from its river. The word Phnom means hill and Penh is the name of a woman. And you might ask me, Topo, what does the river have to do with all of this? Well, it turns out that this lady Phen was by the Mekong River, which is actually the one over there, and she found some wooden Buddhas floating. She considered that something sacred and took it to some hills and created the Phnom Wat. Remember that Phnom means hill and Wat means temple. That's why they named this city Penh's Hill. That's the colorful and mythical origin of this city's name. And since Cambodia had a king, King Norodom I, son of the previous king, they needed to build an imperial palace. And here before you is the imperial palace of the Kingdom of Cambodia. This palace began to be built in 1866. In 1867, the transfer of the capital to Phnom Penh was made official and the palace was finally inaugurated in 1871. But it underwent a series of modifications, renovations, and expansions to become what we see today. It was only completed in 1917, still during the French protectorate. And you might ask me, Topo, is this still the royal palace of Cambodia? Alright, calm down a bit with the anxiety, I'll tell you in a moment. The only thing I'll tell you is that to visit this place, I had to pay an entrance fee of $10, and they're pretty strict about clothing. If you're a woman, you can't enter wearing a tank top or short skirts, and men, yes, we can enter wearing shorts, but supposedly they have to be below the knee. I'm kind of on the edge, but well, where patriarchy rules, men have more privileges than women, and it's not like I'm an ally, you know? Although the base of the building's architecture is of Khmer origin, we can see the sloped roofs and everything in gold, which represents royalty. Let's remember that for the Chinese, gold and yellow were also colors that only the emperor could use. And in the ornamentation, the prang stands out, which are those wavy figures that symbolically represent Mount Meru, which in Indo-Buddhist mythology means the center of the cosmos. The materials were local, the labor was extremely poorly paid, if paid at all, by local workers, but the teak, the silver, and the money were provided by France. The situation was as follows. Norodom Bans, the king of Cambodia at that time, said, "Well, I'd rather make a deal with the French than have them destroy my country." And the French said, "Well, we'll put a king in place, we'll win him over with a new royal palace, and we have guaranteed control and the status quo of Cambodian territory, and we have no possibility of any kind of rebellion, so we can rule peacefully." The French, just like with the other territories in Indochina, were interested in their natural resources and their almost slave-like labor force. From here, they got a lot of rice and a lot of rubber. I'm listening to the Chinese guide, but the Chinese don't know that I know Chinese, so I'm listening to their guided explanation. Excuse me, I don't understand you. What? I understand what the guide is saying. I speak Chinese. This building here is the Emerald Buddha Pagoda, and as we can see, it appears on the 1,000 riel bill of Cambodia. And this is where the coronations of the last kings of Cambodia took place. Look, this building differs in its architecture from the rest of those in the complex. They call this building Napoleon III because it was gifted by Napoleon III himself to the Cambodian monarchy at the end of the 19th century. And in this place, they used to hold diplomatic receptions. All the materials were brought from Europe. Actually, the whole complex was a gift from the French, but this one was not only a gift, it also kept its original architecture. Look at this majestic temple. It's known as the Silver Pagoda. This is a Buddhist temple, but not for just any monk or any Buddhist, it's for the monarchy. We're going to go in, but we have to take off our shoes. These Columbias are better than mine. I think they're the same size. We play it cool and upgrade our sneakers. They don't let you film inside, unfortunately. It's beautiful. I managed to sneak a few shots in there. And it's called the Silver Pagoda because its floor is made of 5,000 silver tiles, each one weighing a kilo. And at the same time, it's crazy because as you walk, you hear the crack, crack, crack of the tiles. And then the decoration inside is beautiful, all made of gold. The Chinese gave me a bottle of cold water, the best thing that ever happened to me. That alone justifies all the years I spent studying Chinese. This Buddhist temple is less aristocratic and more for the people. I saw a woman down there washing her face so she could go inside. Look, here are all the royal chairs, the palanquins. These are original. That's amazing. Here you can see the current king, Norodo Sihamoni, sitting on that chair and people carrying him on a litter, exactly on this one, and it's made of gold. This is a bigger carriage. It's like a royal bus. It would be a bus for royalty. Look, here you can see a miniature replica of Angkor Wat, the temple of the ancient Khmer capital, which is sacred to them. And it has very good feng shui. Notice that it's surrounded by water and inside there are carp fish. Life, we could say, was rosy for the Cambodian monarchy during the French protectorate, not for the Cambodian people, of course. But that rosy life lasted until World War II because France was invaded by Germany and then the Vichy state was formed. And that state was nothing more than a puppet of Nazi Germany. Therefore, French Indochina became part of this Vichy state, which was indirectly part of Nazi Germany. And since they belonged to the Axis group, they were very close to the Japanese Empire, and this empire did nothing but come and invade territories in Indochina. They had already been invading territories in China itself since the 1930s. In 1932, they invaded Manchukuo, the Manchuria area, and that's how they kept advancing. They had invaded Shanghai, they had invaded what is now Vietnam, and Cambodia also experienced a Japanese invasion. It was a rather relaxed invasion. There was no opposition at all. Once World War II ended, the Axis was defeated. Therefore, the Japanese Empire withdrew its forces from this area, and the new post-war French state advanced aggressively over its invaded territories. But meanwhile, in 1947, Norodom Sihanouk, who was the Prince of Cambodia and the grandson of that first Norodom, who reigned in this palace for the first time and was also a descendant of the royal family of ancient Cambodia, re-established the Cambodian state. And in 1953, the independence of Cambodia was officially proclaimed. And here is the monument that commemorates it. From that moment on, after almost 100 years, Cambodia became an independent kingdom again. This reign, on one hand, pushed aside the United States, which was seeking to have influence in Cambodia, but it also pushed aside the communists and the conservatives, neither Yankees nor Marxists. We could say that this Cambodian monarchy was the third position. Norodom Sihanouk was the Cambodian Peron. In fact, he was ruling during the time of Peron's first and second terms. It made sense within the international context. On the other hand, there was a strong revolutionary movement based in Vietnam, which was the Viet Minh, with one of its main leaders and figures, Ho Chi Minh. And here, one of the factions influenced by the Viet Minh, there were the Khmer Rouge, who adopted the name Khmer because of their ethnic origin, and Rouge because they were based on Marxist-Leninist ideologies. They were the communists of Cambodia. Yes, I know you're going to tell me the Khmer Rouge sounds like the name of a cumbia band from the 90s in Argentina. But they had a much more fatal outcome than any cumbia band from our country. Oh no, please, how cute! Hi, Mish. Oh, how beautiful you are. In 1970, the United States was very concerned about Cambodia because the Khmer Rouge not only wanted to seize power, but they were also collaborators with the Viet Cong, who were fighting in Vietnam against the United States. Let's remember, we're already in the Vietnam War context. And that's how they encouraged the coup d'etat by General Lon Nol, which ended up effectively overthrowing King Norodom Sihanouk. This king took refuge in Mao's China, and this coup d'etat sparked the fury of the Khmer Rouge. The revolutionary guerrilla army was enraged, and at the same time, in the minds of Nixon and Kissinger in the United States, there was the concept of the domino effect of communism, which dominated in the Soviet Union and in China. They were winning, and they were also afraid that it would end up succeeding in Cambodia. And that's why, to use force against Vietnam and against the Ho Chi Minh Trail, from where they were supplied with weapons and provisions, they decided to bomb Cambodia in Operation Linebacker in 1972. An operation that was never officially reported to the United States Congress. The result, 150,000 dead. Besides that, at that time, the Yankees filled the entire territory of Cambodia with landmines. In fact, today, Cambodia is one of the most heavily mined territories in the world. And that's how, following the victorious wave of the Viet Cong, who reclaimed South Vietnam in 1975, the fall of Phnom Penh took place. In fact, the fall of Phnom Penh happened a few days before that of Saigon. Over there, it was on April 30, 1975. And here, on April 17, the government of Lon Nol, the dictatorial figure imposed by the United States, falls. And the Khmer Rouge begin to rule in Cambodia. They transform this country into the Democratic Republic of Kampuchea. And their leader becomes Pol Pot, a fighter within the Khmer Rouge. The son of a Cambodian landowner who had the opportunity to study in France when Cambodia was part of the French protectorate of Indochina. And what they did here was establish an extremist government. They defined themselves as communists and focused on eliminating imperialism and feudalism. Imperialism was based on all the French and Japanese domination. But they also began to consider Vietnam as an imperial threat. That is, they broke with the Vietnamese government, which was also communist. And they also began to see cities as a threat and as a Western imposition. Yes, urban centers for the Khmer Rouge were an enemy to the construction of a communist government. And therefore they decided that Phnom Penh should disappear as such. A massive and forced exodus of all the city's inhabitants took place so that they would go live in the countryside. People who lived in the city, who had nothing to do with the countryside, were forced to go work in rural communes. And not only that, but the long march from the cities to the countryside didn't have enough logistical support. And most people had to walk because there wasn't enough fuel to guarantee transportation. And during that walk from the countryside to the city, many people died because they couldn't endure the entire journey. Besides, just imagine the heat here. Today it's 35 degrees, and for Cambodia that's normal. And therefore Phnom Penh became a ghost town. All this monster we see today 50 years ago was just an empty shell. And within the disaster that was the social and economic organization of Pol Pot's government, the worst of all was the torture, oppression, and genocide they committed. And as an example of that, we are right now at Pul Slade. We could say that it is a Cambodian concentration camp. Here, everyone who was against the Khmer Rouge regime was tortured and massacred. And who were considered ideological enemies by the Khmer Rouge? Not only those who thought differently, but they also considered science, for example, to be an enemy. For them, science was a bourgeois practice. They even stopped using medicine. All intellectuals were also considered opponents. The mere fact of, for example, wearing glasses could already make you be considered an intellectual, and therefore you were condemned by the regime. I mean, I would have been in trouble. The communes also had to meet a certain level of production, and if they didn't, they could be punished and sent to these concentration camps. And the fact that there was no industry led to extremely poor economic conditions. And in this particular case, I call myself to reflect, because this group of thugs, these despicable sons of bitches, the Khmer Rouge, under the leadership of Pol Pot, defined themselves as communists, as Marxists. And nothing could be further from socialism, from communism, from Marxism than this kind of government. And many will say, look at what communism did, right? As if this were communism. And I'm going to bring up a phrase from a professor I had at my university back then, far away and long ago. Professor Rolando Astarita, who in his first classes quoted a very interesting phrase, which is from, "Let's not judge Marxism and communism by the things that were done in their name." And really, these guys had nothing to do with Marxism. In fact, Pol Pot had no knowledge of Marxism as such. And all the Khmer Rouge? All the soldiers were idiots who had an average age of 15, who were really morally destroyed because they had already been overwhelmed in Cambodia. For more than 30 years, since the time of World War II, fighting against the bombings by the Americans, the whole country was mined. And these groups were all over the place. It was a disaster. And Pol Pot himself was a walking contradiction because the guy was against big cities, yet he grew up in Phnom Penh and he was against imperialism and he was educated in France. Now, since the Khmer Rouge didn't have technology because they had dismantled the industry, they didn't have enough bullets to execute all the people. So it's estimated that only about 30% of the people killed were shot, executed by firing squad. The rest were killed in unconventional ways, either by being struck on the head with axes, hammered, or hanged. That's how 70% of the human victims of the Cambodian genocide were massacred. How many people died at the hands of these sons of bitches? Between 2 and 3 million people. And the Cambodian population at that time was around 8 million people. We're talking about practically 30% of the population dying at the hands of the Khmer Rouge in just 4 years. Since the city wasn't functioning because they had moved everyone to the countryside, they used many of its buildings as detention centers. Public buildings like this one here, which used to be a school, we can see that these are the classrooms. There's the courtyard, and they also used other public buildings, even many Buddhist temples, because religion was forbidden. Here in this detention center, it's estimated that around 18,000 people were killed, including children among them as well. Look at this. It was a cell. How harsh. A sign right there on the cell door that says smiling is prohibited. Here they tortured them. They would hang them up there or put their heads inside those containers filled with water. I'm having a really terrible time here. I'm telling you, it's like we're here in the Cambodian prison. Honestly, it's really intense. Honestly, I don't know why I came. I mean, I don't like these places. The energy you feel here is overwhelming. And I see that there are a lot of people who come here with the attitude of, well, I'm going to a tourist spot, people laughing, treating this like it's just another excursion. Just another little spot in the travel guide for Phnom Penh. You see this wire? It's a concentration camp. The same feeling. This hell lasted 4 years. Until 1979, when the Vietnamese took over Cambodian territory and displaced the Khmer Rouge. And they established here the Socialist Republic of Kampuchea, a communist Vietnam that removed from power a movement that was considered communist. In that context, in 1985, the Vietnamese appointed Hun Sen as the Cambodian Prime Minister, a rather peculiar figure, make a note of that. The guy from the Khmer Rouge even had a glass eye because he lost it during the fall of Phnom Penh. He had fought for the Khmer Rouge's rise to power, but later ended up going into exile due to differences with Pol Pot. And right here we can find the Cambodian-Vietnamese Friendship Monument. Communist Vietnam ruled Cambodia until 1989, when, in the context of the fall of nationalisms internationally, Vietnamese communism began to lose power. By then, Doi Moi had already happened in Vietnam, which is the reform movement of Vietnam. And that's when they decided to let go of Cambodia, which at that moment gained autonomy, and we just went back to the royal palace. Why? Because in 1991, the Paris Agreement was signed. The United Nations created a transitional authority for Cambodia, and in 1993, Cambodia re-established its monarchy, and King Norodom Sihanouk, the historic figure who proclaimed independence in 1953, became the King of Cambodia again. The same one we can still find today on some Cambodian banknotes. And at the same time, in 1993, the United Nations called for elections in Cambodia. And they end up being won by National United Front for an independent, neutral, peaceful and cooperative Cambodia, the National United Front for an independent, neutral, peaceful and cooperative Cambodia, whose candidate was Norodom Ranariddh, Prince of Cambodia, son of Norodom Sihanouk, who had returned that year to be the King of Cambodia. Hun Sen, who was the Prime Minister of Cambodia, loses the elections, but the guy doesn't stay calm. And he doesn't let Norodom Ranariddh govern, but instead forms a government with him, meaning they rule together. But in 1997, Hun Sen ends up staging a coup d'etat against him and ends up governing as Prime Minister. Until when, you might ask? Until 2023. And who has been the Prime Minister of Cambodia since 2023? None other than his son Hun Monit, who represents the Cambodian People's Party. Nothing has changed here. And regarding the Cambodian monarchy, it is still functioning as well. It has a rather ceremonial role, but it is the one that ultimately defines and accepts the figure of the Prime Minister. King Norodom Sihanouk died in 2012 and was even buried in this palace inside the Silver Pagoda building. But back in 2004, he had already handed over the position of king to one of the princes. According to him, his favorite son from his favorite wife, who is Norodom Sihamoni, who also appears on Cambodia's banknotes, on the reals, which comes from the word royal currency, and who is still the king to this day, and quite a unique character. On one hand, he is the half-brother of Norodom Ranadid, who was the one who competed for the position of Prime Minister in 1993. Both are sons of Norodom Sihanouk, but from different mothers. Well, here polyamory is accepted, and at the same time, the current king of Cambodia is kind of a king who didn't want to be king. He lived in France for many years and studied to be a ballet dancer. He even became a ballet teacher in Paris, and he didn't want anything to do with royalty. He didn't want to be king of Cambodia. He wanted to dedicate himself to ballet in France. But well, he had to take over, and here he is. He has been ruling Cambodia as monarch since 2004, and today he is 72 years old. He doesn't have any children, so it is not known who will inherit his legacy in the near future. But to this day, he is the king of Cambodia, and his residence is over there. If you look over there, fences block the way because that's where the king lives. It's really crazy to visit this royal palace because unlike when we visited the imperial palace in Beijing, for example, which is fine, it's just another building, but it's always historical, it's a museum. In this case here, the king of Cambodia still lives in this building. We could say that in the garden of his house, he has a lot of visitors every day. Really a lot of visitors. Honestly, it's really peaceful. Alright, I'm visiting Cambodia during its low season, but it's a destination that even though it has tourism, and tourism is one of the main elements of its economy, it's not tourism as massive as in Thailand or Vietnam. Keep in mind that the palace between 1975 and 1979 during the Khmer Rouge period was abandoned just like the entire city of Phnom Penh. And later, with the Vietnamese government in Cambodia, this complex of buildings was used by the state. Look, there are spots marked in white and others in red, which are restricted areas. And the reason why entry is forbidden is because those buildings are actually used by the Cambodian royal family. And there we see the Cambodian monarchy. The Cambodian reality. Look, everywhere, for example, this is the Ministry of Justice. Images of the current king, Norodom Sihamoni, his father, Norodom Sihanouk, and also his wife, who is the mother of the current king, appear. The images of the prime minister do not appear. It's like the royalty has a lot of influence in Cambodia. Something I forgot to mention inside the palace is that in 1989 it stopped being called the Socialist State of Kampuchea and became known as the State of Cambodia. But in 1993, when the monarchy was restored, it became known as the Kingdom of Cambodia, just as we know it today. And what happened to the Khmer Rouge? Since 1979, when they were displaced by the Vietnamese, they became an underground guerrilla group, meaning Cambodia remained subjected to a civil war, until they finally surrendered in 1991 in the context of the United Nations intervention. And what happened to the infamous Pol Pot? He was hiding in the Cambodian forests and died in 1998. He was never convicted by any court. It is believed that when he died, he was a prisoner of the Khmer Rouge themselves. And even when he died, they used logs and tires to set him on fire, burn him, and make his body disappear. And a year before he died, in 1997, he gave a single interview, the only one he ever gave in his life. And he gave it to Nathayer, an American journalist who published the article in a magazine called Farm Institute Economic Review. And in that interview, Pol Pot denied everything. He completely played dumb about the whole genocide. He said he didn't even know what the soldiers who made up the Khmer Rouge had done to the population. So, what's up with Cambodia? To this day, after having suffered a tremendous social, political, economic, and humanitarian collapse, it is in full reconstruction. Obviously, it's not immune to poverty and informal work. It even has a large part of its population exploited, whether in the textile industries, which are among the most important in its economy, tourism as well. It's another main source of income for Cambodia, but it also leads to many of those harmful practices. Many women have to resort to prostitution. Let's even add to that the many cases of child prostitution. We can see that the country is experiencing significant economic growth. In recent years, it has been growing at an average rate of 5%. You can see it in the many new buildings that are appearing in the cities. We could say that internally, since 1997, when Hun Sen's political uprising took place to establish himself in the government, there has been a certain stability. Through a single party and a monarchy, but that maintains order in a society with such a turbulent recent history. And it also has international conflicts with Thailand. Since the year 2025, they have been having disputes over border territories because of some Buddhist temples, or at least that's the excuse for those military interventions. But the reality is that Cambodia has many oil and gas reserves that still haven't been exploited, and there are certain economic interests from Thailand. This is more or less the story of this country we're visiting. I hope you liked it. For me, making this video was quite intense, especially the part about the torture centers. I'm looking forward to your comments. Thank you for being there and see you next time.